Marcus Rothwell stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a kingdom he had conquered. At 42, he had built an empire worth billions, turning a small tech startup into a global corporation that revolutionized artificial intelligence. Everything he touched turned to gold. Everything except the one thing that mattered most. His son, Daniel, was 7 years old and had never heard his father's voice. The doctors had delivered the diagnosis when Daniel was just 6 months old. Profound sensory neural hearing loss, they called it. Permanent. Irreversible. Marcus had flown specialists in from every corner of the world. He had funded research initiatives, donated millions to medical institutions, and personally reviewed every experimental treatment available. Nothing worked. The silence that surrounded his son remained unbroken. Marcus threw himself into his work with even greater intensity after his wife, Caroline, died in a car accident 3 years ago. The grief was unbearable, but the company demanded his attention, and he gave it willingly. Anything to avoid the crushing guilt that consumed him whenever he looked into Daniel's innocent blue eyes. The boy deserved better than a father who was always absent, always chasing the next deal, the next acquisition, the next victory that might somehow fill the void. Daniel lived in the east wing of their mansion with his caretakers. Marcus had hired the best nannies, the finest tutors specializing in sign language, and therapists who worked with him daily. The boy wanted for nothing materially, yet Marcus knew deep down that what Daniel needed most was the one thing he couldn't seem to provide, his presence. That morning, Marcus had fired the third nanny in as many months. The woman had been competent enough, but Daniel had seemed withdrawn lately, spending hours alone in his room. Marcus convinced himself that a change would help, though he knew he was simply avoiding the real problem. He was a coward, hiding behind his wealth and his busy schedule. His assistant, Jennifer, buzzed through on the intercom. "Mr. Rothwell, the employment agency is sending over candidates for the nanny position this afternoon." "Fine," Marcus replied curtly. "Screen them and send me the top 3. "Actually, sir, there's someone here now. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite insistent. Says her name is Elena Vasquez." Marcus sighed. He didn't have time for walk-ins. "Tell her to go through the proper channels." "I tried, sir. She said she knew Mrs. Rothwell. She has a photograph." Marcus felt his chest tighten. Caroline had been gone for 3 years, but mentions of her still caught him off guard. "Send her up." 5 minutes later, a woman in her mid-50s entered his office. She wore a simple blue dress and carried herself with quiet dignity. Her dark hair was streaked with silver, and her warm brown eyes held a depth of kindness that immediately reminded Marcus of his late grandmother. "Mr. Rothwell," she said, her accent revealing Spanish roots. "Thank you for seeing me. My name is Elena Vasquez. I worked for your wife's family in Mexico many years ago, before you and she were married." Marcus studied the photograph she handed him. It showed a much younger Elena standing beside a teenage Caroline at what appeared to be a birthday party. His wife's smile was radiant, carefree in a way he had rarely seen in their later years together. "I heard about Mrs. Caroline's passing," Elena continued, her voice gentle. "I wanted to come sooner, but I was caring for my own mother until she passed last month. I also heard about young Daniel and his condition. I would like to offer my services as his caretaker." Marcus shook his head. "Ms. Vasquez, I appreciate the gesture, but I have an employment agency handling this. They conduct thorough background checks, verify credentials." "I have all the necessary paperwork," Elena interrupted politely, producing a folder. "I raised 4 children of my own, worked as a pediatric nurse for 15 years, and I'm fluent in American Sign Language. But more importantly, Mr. Rothwell, I understand what your son needs. Not just care, but love. Real love, not the kind that can be bought or scheduled." Her words struck him like a physical blow. Marcus wanted to be offended, to throw her out for her presumption. Instead, he found himself asking, "When can you start?" Elena Vasquez moved into the staff quarters of the Rothwell mansion on a gray Monday morning in October. The estate sprawled across 5 acres of manicured grounds in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. As the taxi pulled through the iron gates, Elena gazed at the 3-story stone mansion and felt a pang of sadness. This was a house, not a home. She could sense it in the perfectly trimmed hedges, the spotless windows, the absence of toys scattered on the lawn or chalk drawings on the driveway. The head of staff, a stern woman named Mrs. Patterson, gave Elena a brisk tour of the premises. "Master Daniel's quarters are in the east wing," she explained, her heels clicking against the marble floors. "He has a bedroom, a playroom, a study area, and a private bathroom. You'll find everything you need. Mr. Rothwell has dinner with his son once a week, usually Friday evenings, though he often cancels. Otherwise, you're to keep the boy occupied and out of the way. Out of the way. The words made Elena's heart ache. Where is Daniel now? She asked. In his playroom. The previous nanny left yesterday. He's been alone since then. Elena stopped walking. Alone? For an entire day? Mrs. Patterson's expression remained neutral. He's 7 years old, Ms. Vasquez, not an infant. He has books, toys, and a tablet with educational programs. Mr. Rothwell believes in fostering independence. Without another word, Elena headed toward the east wing. She found Daniel sitting on the floor of an enormous playroom that looked more like a high-end toy store than a child's space. Everything was organized, pristine, barely touched. The boy himself was small for his age, with his father's dark hair and his mother's delicate features. He was building something with blocks, his movements slow and deliberate. Elena approached carefully and knelt down a few feet away. When Daniel finally noticed her, his eyes widened with surprise. Elena smiled warmly and began to sign. Hello, Daniel. My name is Elena. I'm going to be taking care of you. The boy's hands moved hesitantly. Another new person. Yes, but I'm planning to stay for a very long time if you'll have me. Daniel studied her skeptically. At 7, he had already learned not to trust promises. They all say that. I know, Elena signed. But I mean it. I knew your mother when she was young, about your age. We were friends. For the first time, genuine interest sparked in Daniel's eyes. You knew my mom? I did. She was brave and kind and very funny. Would you like to hear stories about her? Daniel nodded eagerly, and Elena spent the next hour sharing memories of Caroline as a child. She told him about the time Caroline had rescued a stray dog and hidden it in her room for a week, about her terrible singing voice that she insisted on demonstrating at every opportunity, about her infectious laugh that could light up a room. Daniel listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking questions, his signs becoming more animated as he relaxed. Over the following weeks, Elena established a new routine. She woke Daniel each morning with gentle touches and warm smiles. They had breakfast together in the kitchen, much to Mrs. Patterson's disapproval. Elena taught Daniel to cook simple meals, letting him crack eggs and stir batter, creating delightful messes that she cleaned up without complaint. They went for long walks on the estate grounds, where Elena taught him the names of plants and birds through sign language, turning every outing into an adventure. But Elena noticed something troubling. Among Daniel's possessions, she found dozens of drawings. Most showed the same scene, a small figure standing alone while a larger figure stood far away, separated by what looked like a wall or a great distance. The images broke her heart. One evening, as she tucked Daniel into bed, he signed a question. Why doesn't my dad want to be with me? Is it because I can't hear? Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but she kept her expression calm. Your father loves you very much, Daniel. Sometimes grown-ups get lost in their sadness and their work. It's not about you. You are perfect exactly as you are. Then why does he look so sad when he sees me? The question was so perceptive, so painful, that Elena had to take a moment before responding. Because he misses your mother, and when he looks at you, he sees her. That makes him happy and sad at the same time. But that's his problem to fix, not yours. Marcus Rothwell remained a distant figure during those first weeks. Elena saw him occasionally, usually from a distance. He would return home late, disappear into his study, and emerge early the next morning before Daniel woke. On the rare occasions their paths crossed, Elena noticed how he would glance toward the east wing with an expression of longing mixed with fear, as if he wanted to go to his son but couldn't make his feet move in that direction. Elena knew she needed to do something, but confronting a billionaire about his parenting wasn't something one did lightly. Still, watching Daniel's hopeful face fall every time Friday evening arrived and his father cancelled their dinner was becoming unbearable. Something had to change, and soon. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday afternoon in November. Elena had taken Daniel to the mansion's library, a 2-story room filled with thousands of books that looked as though they had never been opened. While Daniel explored the lower shelves, Elena climbed the rolling ladder to examine the upper collections. That's when she noticed a leather-bound box tucked behind some volumes on the highest shelf. Curiosity got the better of her. She carefully retrieved the box and descended the ladder. Inside, wrapped in silk cloth, was an old wooden flute. The instrument was beautifully carved with intricate patterns of vines and flowers. A folded piece of paper lay beneath it. Elena opened the letter and began to read. My dearest Marcus, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm writing this while you're away on your business trip, and Daniel is sleeping peacefully in his crib. The doctors gave us the diagnosis today. Our beautiful boy will never hear music, never hear our voices, never hear the world the way we do. I saw the devastation in your eyes before you left, and I need you to know something. This flute belonged to my grandmother in Mexico. She was a healer in her village, and she believed that music existed beyond sound, that it lived in vibration and intention and love. She used to play this flute for people who were suffering, and they said they could feel the music in their bones, in their souls. I don't know if it's true, Marcus, but I believe in the power of love to transcend any barrier. Don't let fear keep you from our son. He needs you. Not your money, not your empire, just you. Love always, Caroline. Elena's hands trembled as she finished reading. She looked down at Daniel, who was now sitting cross-legged on the floor, absorbed in a picture book. An idea began to form in her mind, wild and unlikely, but worth trying. That evening, after Daniel was asleep, Elena waited in the main hallway for Marcus to return home. When he finally walked through the door at nearly 10 o'clock, his tie loosened and exhaustion evident in every line of his face, she stepped forward. Mr. Rothwell, I need to speak with you. He looked startled to see her. Is Daniel all right? He's fine. Physically. But we need to talk about what's happening to him emotionally. Marcus's jaw tightened. Ms. Vasquez, I appreciate your concern, but... He thinks you don't want him, Elena interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. He thinks his deafness is why you avoid him. He draws pictures of you standing far away from him, separated by walls. Is that the legacy you want to leave your son? The color drained from Marcus's face. I'm not avoiding him. I'm working to secure his future. He doesn't need more security. He needs his father. Elena pulled the flute from her pocket. I found this today. Caroline left you a letter. She handed him both items. Marcus stared at the flute as if seeing a ghost. His hands shook as he unfolded Caroline's letter and read. When he finished, tears were streaming down his face, the first Elena suspected he had shed since his wife's death. I don't know how, Marcus whispered. Every time I look at him, I see her. And I see my failure. I couldn't fix his hearing. I couldn't save her. I can't seem to do anything right when it comes to the people I love most. Elena's voice softened. You're not supposed to fix him, Mr. Rothwell. He's not broken. And you couldn't have saved your wife from an accident. But you can save your relationship with your son. It's not too late. What am I supposed to do with this? Marcus held up the flute. Tomorrow is Friday. You have dinner scheduled with Daniel, and for once, you're not going to cancel. After dinner, you're going to try something. Your wife believed that music transcends sound. Maybe she was right. Maybe she was wrong. But Daniel deserves to see you try. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. All right. I'll be there. The next evening, Daniel could barely contain his surprise when his father actually appeared in the dining room at 6 o'clock sharp. Elena had prepared Daniel's favorite meal, chicken fingers and macaroni and cheese, despite Mrs. Patterson's protest that it wasn't appropriate for formal dining. Marcus sat across from his son, and for the first few minutes, the silence was awkward and heavy. Then Marcus began to sign. His movements were rusty and uncertain, but Daniel's eyes lit up with joy at his father's effort. How was school this week? Marcus asked. Good. Daniel signed enthusiastically. Elena taught me about constellations. Did you know there's a hunter in the sky named Orion? I did know that, Marcus signed back, a small smile forming. When I was your age, my father showed me how to find it. The conversation grew easier. They talked about Daniel's favorite books, his drawings, the garden he wanted to plant with Elena in the spring. Marcus found himself laughing at his son's jokes, seeing past his own grief for the first time in years to recognize the remarkable little boy sitting across from him. Daniel was smart, creative, funny, and resilient. He was his own person, not just a reminder of loss. After dinner, Marcus pulled out the flute. Daniel's eyes widened when he saw the wooden flute in his father's hands. Marcus began to sign, his movements slow and careful. This belonged to your mother's grandmother. Your mom left it for us with a letter. She thought maybe music could exist in ways beyond sound. I don't understand, Daniel signed back, his young face scrunched in confusion. Marcus stood and walked around the table to kneel beside his son's chair. Neither do I, really. But your mother was the smartest person I ever knew, and she believed in things I couldn't always see or measure. She believed in magic, in a way. She believed in us. Will you let me try something? Daniel nodded, his trust in this moment both heartbreaking and hopeful. Marcus lifted the flute to his lips and began to play. The notes that emerged were tentative at first, rusty from years of disuse. He had learned to play as a teenager, a brief phase before business school, and the relentless pursuit of success had consumed him. His fingers fumbled over the holes, searching for muscle memory that had faded. Elena watched from the doorway, her heart in her throat. She saw Daniel's polite but puzzled expression. He couldn't hear the music, of course. This was foolish, she thought. They were grasping at straws, chasing false hope. But then Marcus did something unexpected. He moved closer to Daniel and gently placed the end of the flute against his son's chest, just over his heart, while continuing to play. The wooden instrument vibrated against Daniel's ribcage with each note. Daniel's eyes went wide. His small hand flew to the flute, touching it, feeling the vibrations pulse through his fingertips. Then something extraordinary happened. He placed his other hand on his own chest, feeling the resonance through his bones, his muscles, the very core of his being. Marcus played a simple melody, something he remembered from his childhood. With the flute pressed against Daniel's chest, the boy wasn't hearing the music in the traditional sense, but he was experiencing it. The vibrations traveled through his body, creating patterns and rhythms he could feel. His face transformed from confusion to wonder to pure joy. When Marcus finished the melody, Daniel began to sign frantically. Again. Do it again. I felt it. The music was inside me. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face, but this time they were tears of connection rather than grief. He played again, and Daniel closed his eyes, swaying slightly as he felt the vibrations pulse through his chest. Elena had to turn away, her own vision blurred with emotion. For the next hour, Marcus played every melody he could remember. Folk songs, classical pieces, even clumsy attempts at pop songs he had heard on the radio. Daniel experienced each one through touch and vibration, his face radiant with discovery. He began to move with the rhythms, creating his own dance based on what he felt rather than what he heard. This is what Mom wanted us to find, Daniel signed when Marcus finally lowered the flute, exhausted. She wanted you to share music with me. Marcus pulled his son into his arms, holding him tightly for the first time in years. I'm so sorry I've been away. I'm so sorry I let fear keep me from you. You are the most important thing in my life, Daniel. Not my company, not my money. You. I promise I'm going to do better. Daniel hugged him back fiercely. Will you play for me every day? Every single day, Marcus promised. Over the following weeks, the mansion began to transform. Marcus restructured his entire work schedule, delegating responsibilities he had insisted on controlling personally. He started leaving the office at 5 o'clock, something his employees initially thought was a prank. He had dinner with Daniel every night, and afterward, they had their music sessions. But the flute ritual evolved into something even more profound. Marcus began researching vibrotactile music therapy, discovering that what Caroline's grandmother had understood intuitively, modern science was now confirming. People who were deaf could experience music through vibrations, and these experiences could be deeply emotional and meaningful. He invested in specialized equipment, bone conduction headphones, vibrotactile vests, bass shakers that could be attached to furniture. Daniel's playroom became a sensory music studio where he could feel symphonies through his entire body. Marcus learned to play other instruments, each offering different vibrational patterns. Guitar, drums, even piano, which they positioned so Daniel could place his hands on the soundboard while Marcus played. Elena watched the transformation in both father and son with quiet satisfaction. Marcus smiled more, laughed more. The darkness that had clouded his eyes for years began to lift. Daniel blossomed under his father's attention, becoming more confident and outgoing. But then, 3 months after finding the flute, something unexpected happened. Elena was helping Daniel get ready for bed when he suddenly grabbed her arm, his signing urgent and excited. Elena, I need to tell Dad something important. It happened today. What happened, sweetheart? When he was playing the flute this afternoon, I felt something different. Not just the vibrations. Something else. Something inside my head. His small hands moved rapidly, struggling to articulate something he didn't fully understand himself. Elena's heart began to race. Show me what you mean. Daniel pointed to his ears, then to his head. Like a feeling. Like when you know someone is standing behind you even though you can't see them. The music felt far away, but it was there. Elena tried to remain calm, but her mind was spinning. Dr. Sarah Chen stared at the test results on her computer screen for the third time, unable to believe what she was seeing. As the head of pediatric audiology at the city's most prestigious medical center, she had examined thousands of patients over her 20-year career. She had never seen anything like this. Marcus Rothwell sat across from her, his hand clasped tightly around Daniel's. Elena stood behind them, her expression hopeful but guarded. They had rushed to the clinic first thing that morning after Daniel's revelation the previous night. Mr. Rothwell, Dr. Chen began carefully, when Daniel was diagnosed 7 years ago, the test showed profound sensorineural hearing loss. His cochlear hair cells were severely damaged, likely due to a genetic mutation. That diagnosis was definitive. Every test we've run since then has confirmed it. But Marcus prompted, hearing the hesitation in her voice. Dr. Chen turned her screen to face them. But today's tests show something different. Daniel has what we call awareness of sound. It's not functional hearing, not in the traditional sense. He can't understand speech or distinguish musical notes the way you or I can. However, he is detecting low-frequency vibrations through bone conduction pathways that we previously thought were non-functional. Marcus leaned forward. I don't understand. What does that mean? The human body can perceive sound through multiple pathways. Most of us rely on air conduction, where sound waves travel through the ear canal to the eardrum and then to the cochlea. But there's also bone conduction, where vibrations travel directly through the skull bones to the inner ear. For most people, this is a supplementary pathway. But in Daniel's case, something remarkable has happened. She pulled up additional scans. These imaging studies show increased neural activity in the auditory cortex regions of Daniel's brain. That neural activity wasn't present in his scans from 6 months ago. Somehow, likely through the consistent vibrotactile stimulation you've been providing with the music therapy, his brain has created new neural pathways. It's teaching itself to interpret vibrational input as a form of auditory information. Elena gasped softly. Marcus felt as though the air had been knocked from his lungs. Are you saying he can hear? Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. No, Dr. Chen said firmly. Not in the way you're hoping. He's not going to suddenly start speaking or responding to his name being called. But he is experiencing sound in a unique way. Think of it like this. If normal hearing is like watching a high-definition movie, what Daniel is developing is more like seeing the shadows on the wall of Plato's cave. It's not the full picture, but it's something. It's real. Daniel had been watching their lips move during this conversation, unable to follow it. Now Marcus turned to him and began to sign, explaining what the doctor had discovered. Daniel's face lit up with excitement. I knew it wasn't just vibrations, he signed. I could feel something more. Dr. Chen smiled at the boy. Daniel, I want to try something. Is that okay? She waited for his nod, then pulled out a small drum. She had Daniel place his hands flat on her desk, then she struck the drum at varying intensities and rhythms. Each time, she asked him to describe what he felt. Daniel's descriptions were remarkable. He could distinguish between hard strikes and soft ones, fast rhythms and slow ones. He could even tell when Dr. Chen hit the drum closer to him versus farther away based on how the vibrations traveled through the desk. This is extraordinary, Dr. Chen said. Mr. Rothwell, what you've stumbled upon through that flute has opened up neural pathways that formal medicine has been trying to develop for years. There are experimental programs using similar concepts, but they are in early stages. You've essentially been conducting successful music therapy without realizing it. Over the next several weeks, Dr. Chen worked closely with the family to develop a comprehensive program. They combined the traditional flute playing with more advanced vibrotactile technologies. Daniel began wearing a special vest that translated different instruments and sounds into vibrational patterns across his torso. Low frequencies pulsed in his chest, mid frequencies in his abdomen, high frequencies in his shoulders. The results were astounding. Daniel began to identify different instruments by their vibrational signatures. He could tell when his father was playing the flute versus the guitar versus the piano. He started to recognize rhythmic patterns in music and could even create his own rhythms on drums, responding to what he felt in his body. But the most profound changes were emotional rather than medical. Marcus had completely restructured his life around his son. He sold a significant portion of his business stake, stepping back from daily operations to focus on being present. The study that had been his sanctuary became a music room where he and Daniel spent hours each evening exploring sound through touch and vibration. Elena watched it all with deep satisfaction. One evening, as she was preparing to retire to her quarters, Marcus stopped her in the hallway. Elena, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never properly thanked you. You saved my son. You saved me." Elena shook her head. "No, Mr. Rothwell. I just reminded you of what your wife already knew. That love finds a way. That connection transcends barriers. That sometimes the impossible is just the improbable waiting for someone brave enough to try." "Caroline would have loved seeing this," Marcus said softly. "She is seeing it," Elena replied. "I'm certain of that." 6 months after finding the flute, the Rothwell mansion had transformed completely. The sterile, museum-like quality had given way to something warmer and more alive. Daniel's artwork covered the refrigerator. Toys were scattered in the living room. Laughter echoed through hallways that had once known only silence. Marcus started a foundation dedicated to vibrotactile music therapy research, funding programs that made the technology accessible to families who couldn't afford it. He and Daniel became advocates, sharing their story to help other families understand that deafness wasn't a limitation to overcome but a different way of experiencing the world. Daniel thrived. He excelled in his studies, made friends at the school for the deaf he attended, and discovered a passion for percussion instruments. He couldn't hear them in the traditional sense, but he could feel them, and that feeling was his own unique form of music. On the 3rd anniversary of finding the flute, the family gathered in what had become their tradition, an evening music session followed by dinner. Marcus played the wooden flute that had started everything, the instrument pressed against Daniel's chest. Elena watched from her favorite chair, knitting a scarf for Daniel's upcoming birthday. When the melody ended, Daniel signed to his father. "Mom was right. Music isn't just about hearing. It's about feeling. And I feel it, Dad. Every time you play, I feel how much you love me." Marcus set down the flute and pulled his son close. "Your mother was wise about many things. But the wisest thing she ever did was leave us that letter. It gave me permission to try, to fail, to keep trying. It brought us back together." "Do you think she knew this would happen?" Daniel asked. Marcus glanced at Elena, who met his eyes with a knowing smile. "I think she knew that love would find a way. And she was right. She's always been right." That night, long after Daniel was asleep, Marcus stood in his study looking at Caroline's photograph on his desk. He picked up the wooden flute and played softly, the melody drifting through the quiet house. He liked to imagine that somehow, somewhere, she could feel the vibrations too. That she knew her gift had healed more than just the silence between a father and son. It had healed the broken pieces of their hearts, teaching them that connection transcends all barriers, and that love truly does find a way.